Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Julianne Worden, and I will be your moderator this evening as we travel through art history with Rick and our special guest, Jean Openshaw. And now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Rick Steves, who will be one of our tour guides this evening. Hi, Rick.
Julianne, thank you so much for that introduction. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight on Monday Night Travel. I've lost track of how many of these we've had, but we're going on. Well, this is our third season, and we've had lots of travel fun together. I sure look forward to Monday nights, whether I'm hosting or whether I get to sneak in and enjoy the show myself. I'm going to enjoy the show myself tonight for sure, because we're talking about art and we're celebrating our new production. We've spent a couple of years, it's been art all the time. It's the Rick Steves Art of Europe special. It's a 6-hour miniseries, and it's airing all over the country right now on public television. We've got every station in the country picking it up. We're 4 weeks into it. Tonight in Seattle, they're debuting hour number 4 of our 6-hour series. You can watch Rick Steves Art of Europe live on TV. You can stream it on the PBS Passport app, or you can watch it at ricksteves.com in our TV section. But only here can you enjoy a special kind of behind the scenes look at how all this stuff comes together with the co-author of our script. So thank you for joining us. Right now, I want to welcome Jean Openshaw. He's going to co-host tonight with me on Monday Night Travel. Jean.
Hey, Rick. Great to be here.
Well, thank you, Jean. And I don't know, I'm just feeling kind of euphoric because you and I hatched this idea a long time ago. Well, actually, you and I were writing art books back in the 80s when we were kids.
We were, and we first hatched this idea we talked about this TV script like 20 years ago. We did. I remember that. Anyway, go ahead. Keep going.
And as we look through the script, I hear phrases that came out when you and I wrote this book back in, I think, 1984 for the first time, Europe 101, History and Art for the Travelers by Rick and Jean. I'm so thankful, Jean, that we were able to take this opportunity as kind of opportune during COVID because we couldn't travel, but we had 20 years of archives of art to weave together to write this script. Writing the script was a major process. It's a 90-page script, and you spearheaded that. And it was a trick to get the story of Europe down into 6 hours, wasn't it?
It was because you're weaving together it's words, but you're also weaving together images. So you got to always be thinking about what's going to illustrate this. And you have shot so much beautiful footage of Europe and its art over the years that it would be a shame if we didn't use some of that already. And in fact, that was probably one of the biggest problems of writing the script. We had so much great stuff. We had this big pile, a treasure chest of beautiful art. And what are you going to throw out?
I remember going through all the shows and just like with a tractor, I could just grab chunks of art from everywhere in Europe. And then I just took it over to your house and I dumped it on the front yard. And I said, Jean, let's make a TV show out of this. And you went through and you wrote the script, and it was so beautiful. I remember reading it going, this is gorgeous, but Jean, we just don't have that much time. It was, it would have been hours and hours and hours. And, it was a daunting task, but your script was like, honestly, I read through it and I go, how can you violate this thing? But we did more than violated it. We just put it into a chipper and we had to bring
the weed whacker. Yeah.
It was a good process, wasn't it? And now we've got this 90-page script, 7,000 words per hour, 6 hours, and it's tight. And we didn't know for sure how it would flow, but talk about the arc of the story of Europe. It just...
Yeah, it's not really an art. It's not so much an art lesson as it is a story, and it shows the European story with all its ups and downs. You got the rise of Rome and the fall of Rome. You've got 1,000 years wandering in the deserts of the medieval period, and then you come out into the Renaissance, and then suddenly everything just speeds up as the trends of the Renaissance start snowballing and revolution and freedom until you reach the wild and wacky modern age that we live in today.
And you watch that. I don't know if you binge watch it or watch it 1 hour a week for 6 weeks, but then you go, I'm just going to pour myself a glass of wine and I'm going to turn the volume off and I'm just going to watch the beautiful images. You could watch it and it's kind of dense and learn all that stuff. And then you could watch just the images, couldn't you?
You
It'll
could
just-
turn the sound off and put on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, and it all syncs up.
It.
I'm sorry, that's a very obscure reference. I'm sorry.
Well, here's to obscure references, Gene.
There
Thank
you go. All right.
And I got to say, I'm going back to Italy with a little wine tonight. I'm drinking a beautiful Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. And oh, geez, I love Tuscany. I love Tuscany, and for a good reason for it. It's beautiful red wine. This is a Sangiovese grape. And when you have a Vino Nobile, it's called Vino Nobile because it was a favorite of nobles way back when. And I just learned that there's a rule. It's got to be at least 70% Sangiovese, and then they can mix in other grapes as they like, depending on the vintner. It has to be aged at least 2 years, and it is in oak barrels. And when you think of art forms, this is a drinkable art form, and that's our next show, maybe, Gene. But right now, we decided to do the Renaissance, and you decided to make it a little more broad and a little more complicated. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's kind of controlled chaos. What we're gonna do is get a good look at some of the most beautiful art in Europe, from the past, from the present, from the medieval period, from the Baroque period, but we'll see it all in a very unique perspective, and that is through the lens of the Renaissance. Because in a way, the Renaissance was the linchpin of history. It's the middle of our 6-part TV series. Mm-hmm. And the Renaissance kind of looked to the past, inherited what was good from the past, churned it all together, and then pushed it forward into the future to create the world that we're into today. So as we go through and look at this art, we may be bouncing here and bouncing there, this statue, this painting, past, future, we're always going to bring it back to the place where so many of these trends intersect, the Renaissance.
You know, Gene, I love Sister Wendy, but I don't know if I'd want to have a glass of wine with her and look at her. I'd
have to have a, well, yeah.
But we're going to make it fun, And when we did our first book, we had a fictitious professor on the back cover. His name was Stuffy Balding, right?
Oh, Professor Stuffy Balding, the art history professor who was a stickler for all the names and dates and don't make big generalizations and, keep everything in order. And we decided that was basically totally boring.
Yeah.
So, and we were going to do a different kind of history book and art book, something that people can enjoy a little better. And that's what we hope to do tonight. I'm just going to kick back and have fun and enjoy some of these beautiful clips that we've assembled from the shows.
Okay. So what's our first clip, Gene?
Great place to start is probably the very first episode. In this thing, we've got a 60-second clip that's a montage of images that takes us from the very beginning of history to the present day, illustrated with great art. So as you roll it, we're seeing 15,000 years in 60 seconds.
The story of Europe is shaped by its art, and its art is shaped by its story. In this 6-part series, we'll track the exciting evolution of European art and architecture over the centuries. We'll venture from prehistoric cave paintings to the rise of great civilizations: Egypt, Greece, and Rome. After 1,000 years of Middle Ages, with its great castles, soaring cathedrals, and radiant religious art, we'll see how the spirit of the ancient world was reborn in the Renaissance, which produced some of the world's greatest masterpieces. Tracing the rise of kings with their awe-inspiring palaces and dramatic art, we'll see how that old world was eventually toppled by revolution, to be replaced with modern industry and the art of a prosperous Belle Epoque. And we'll finish by careening through Europe's tumultuous 20th century, with hard times, great times, and the art that helped tell the story. Geez, what a sizzle reel, Gene. I'm sizzling all over right now. And there's these themes, there's love, there's
there's the rise of civilizations and the search for order and meaning in the world. There's the religious passion that people had in the Middle Ages.
There's art is propaganda. I mean, it's all paid for somebody for a reason. What is going on here? My goodness.
And probably running through that, and more than anything, is the yearning for freedom that people had, and constantly coming up against authoritarian regimes as they were working towards and demanding freedom. And all of those themes ultimately intersect in the Renaissance. So let's figure out what the Renaissance is.
Okay, so here we go. What is the Renaissance?
Though best known for its art, the Renaissance would change Europe in every way, from politics to economics to religion.
Most of all, it was a whole new attitude toward life, a new optimism and confidence. It was humanism. Humanism focused not on our sinfulness, as dominated the Middle Ages, but in our essential goodness. People worked hard. Making money was respectable, and excellence was rewarded. Real-life people, not just saints and kings, were worthy of being portrayed realistically in all their human glory. Humanism.
In politics, the Renaissance meant budding democracy. It was people power, not kings. This was the city hall. In economics, merchants were developing modern capitalism, like banking and loans.
Scientists were delving into nature. Artists were employing new techniques to show depth and to portray things more realistically. And architects were going forward by going back to ancient Greek-style columns and Roman-style arches.
If the Renaissance was the foundation of our modern world, a foundation for the Renaissance was classical art. Sculptors, painters, and poets alike turned to ancient work for inspiration.
For example, this Renaissance portrayal of the Three Graces was inspired by ancient versions from 1,500 years earlier. This Renaissance goddess clearly modeled on works done in ancient times. And this Holy Virgin Mary looks suspiciously like this very pagan ancient goddess of love. The great pre-Christian thinkers, like Plato and Aristotle, were back in vogue. And in architecture, the ultimate Renaissance-designed church was essentially this ancient dome placed upon this ancient basilica. Oh, man. Hey, Gene, just a minute ago, I step on your lines a lot, and I won't apologize for that, but I stepped on your toast. You were going to raise your glass to a toast, and I stepped on it. I'd like to.
I didn't realize that I was, but I'm always up for a toast. Hey, let's toast to use this as a historical lubricant to making better connections between pieces of art.
Oh, that's beautiful. Here's to that. And here's a toast to everybody who's watching. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy this labor of love that Gene and I have actually quite enjoyed for the last couple of years. Hey, Gene, that last clip made it really clear that, the Renaissance pioneered a lot of things.
Yeah, democracy, science, new technology, and realistic art. And even just a whole new way of looking at the world. It really revolutionized Europe in every way. But the main feature that probably defines the Renaissance, it's built right into the name itself, Renaissance means rebirth, is the rebirth of values of the ancient world. So in this next clip, let's make our first really big leap back in time, back from the Renaissance 2,000 years earlier to the world that inspired the Renaissance, and that is the world of ancient Greece. Ancient Greece. Let's see what the world was like for the ancient Greeks.
Okay, so we're going to make a leap. Let's hold hands. We're going to go how far back?
About 2,000 years,
okay,
from 1,500 to, let's go back to, say, 500 BC, when you're reaching the dawn of the golden age of Greece.
Here we go.
For the Greeks, the human body epitomized the balance and order of the cosmos. The balanced contrapposto pose, again weight resting on one leg, is found on countless statues. They were looking for the perfect balance between opposites, between stillness and motion. Like this athlete as he coils, pausing just before unleashing the discus. The correct proportions of these perfect humans echoed the order of the Greek cosmos and symbolized their highest ideals. The optimistic Greeks portrayed their gods as humans with perfect anatomy. This well-proportioned statue from a later period is Venus de Milo. This goddess of love epitomizes the balance the Greeks so admired. Split Venus down the middle from nose to toes and see how the two halves balance. Her contrapposto pose sets her entire body in motion. Her left leg rises while her right shoulder drops. Her knee points one way, her face the other. All this gives her body a pleasing S-curve as Venus slowly orbits around her vertical axis. Amid an entourage of twisting and striding statues, each modeling the ideal human form, Venus de Milo reigns supreme, summing up all that was best in the ancient Greek world.
Oh, Gene, I found myself going like this when I was watching that. And I felt like, you remember in Amadeus when Salieri was recognizing the genius of Mozart? And not to say you and I were on that scale, although no, we did a good job, but we did a noble effort. But the art is to behold, to appreciate it. And I just thought we're going to be breaking it up, for the next hour. And it's almost cruel to do that because it's such a beautiful sweep that you've written and that our staff has edited together with the music and everything. And I hope and pray that people can watch these clips in their entirety because we're giving a fun little cubist approach to it right now, aren't we?
Yes, and Venus de Milo is probably, I think, is a perfect example of how great art can resonate across the centuries. Because look at her here. Think of her pose, contrapposto, demure, a bit disarming. And remember her pose, because now let's make another leap, and now let's bounce back 2,000 years later, back to the Renaissance, and see how Venus with her pose resonates in this great Renaissance painting by Botticelli, The Birth of Venus, or Venus on the Half Shell.
Okay, so look right now at this Venus. And again, and then we're going to go to the inspiration of a Renaissance genius, Botticelli, with the same glorious icon of beauty.
The epitome of early Renaissance beauty may be Botticelli's Birth of Venus, the first large-scale depiction of a naked woman in 1,000 years. Born from the foam of a wave, Venus is just waking up. The world itself seems fresh and newly born. The god of the wind sets the whole scene in motion. Floating ashore on her scallop shell, Venus takes center stage. Botticelli creates an ideal world, perfectly lit. The bodies curve harmoniously. The faces are idealized, and their gestures exude grace. Naked as a newborn, Venus symbolized the optimism of the Renaissance.
Naked as a newborn, Venus symbolized the optimism of the Renaissance. We struggled with that line. That is a beautifully crafted line, Gene, and it says so much. Look at, and it's a woman. It's always been women so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, think of it. So many of the art icons that everybody knows are women. Botticelli's Venus, Venus de Milo, Winged Victory,
Mona Lisa, Betty Crocker.
Lady Liberty in the French Revolution, leading the people to victory.
Yeah,
so many of them are women, and it does seem that artists throughout the years have chosen the figure of women to capture the spirit of the age. That's in fact what we're going to see for the next series of clips, is we're going to see different women from different periods of history, what scholars sometimes call Venus figurines. And we'll see how they change over time to reflect the changing times, with each woman expressing the spirit of its age. Let's start, in fact, with the very beginning, back nearly with cavemen times. What were they sculpting? Women.
From the very earliest times, the most common art created was small statues of women.
And that, by the way, I remember from my college art classes, was considered, at least back then, the first piece of art that they had excavated, a woman, a fertility figure.
Historians call them Venus figurines. Whether bountiful or lean, they have similar features. Arms folded, generic faces, and stylized breasts and pubic area. By emphasizing women's life-giving traits, they were likely fertility symbols, worshipped as a way to gain Mother Nature's favor for having a child, a good harvest, or rebirth.
Boy, Gene, I guess back then it was all hands on deck just to survive.
Yeah, so that's what their Venuses symbolized: survival, reproduction, birth, life. But as societies evolved and they had different values, the figures, the Venuses, also evolved. So let's, in this next clip, move ahead and see what the Venuses were like in Greek times.
For the Greeks, the evolution of their goddesses mirrored the evolution of their society, from the simple figurines of prehistory to the stiff but stable statues of the Archaic period after centuries of turmoil. Settling into the Golden Age, becoming ever more relaxed and realistic. And finally, the wild exuberance of this goddess, emblematic of the next stage in Greek art, the Hellenistic era.
God, I love that.
Winged Victory, so different from the Venus de Milo that came before. You know, this Winged Victory isn't like a posing supermodel. She's a warrior. She was standing on the prow of a battleship. You know, her wings flared back. You know,
I can imagine one finger going up like, we're number one, we're victorious.
And so what did she symbolize? Well, the times. What was going on in Greece is they were conquering the whole rest of the world. So this goddess was a symbol of victory. Each era has its goddess.
And then we move into the Christian era in the Middle Ages, and with Christianity dominant in Western European culture, a new Venus came to town. And her name was, of course, Mary.
The Virgin Mary, yeah.
Catholic worshippers were comforted by endearing images of the Virgin Mary, or Madonna. This eternally patient and loving figure took many forms, from sweet and motherly to direct and accessible, to the protector of the faithful. Wrapped in warm colors and soft light, this Madonna embodies the Catholic belief that Mary was born completely pure, conceived immaculately. Art could convey that notion more powerfully than any highfalutin church declaration.
Boy, you know, God and Jesus happen to be men in the way they're thought of. And I guess you got to have a female character, and Mary really filled a role.
Yeah, a symbol of compassion and accessibility.
Yeah.
You know, but really the female figures that we've seen so far really have been not real women, but more symbols and goddesses, as it were, or heavenly beings, a symbol of something else. But by the time you reach the end of the Middle Ages and the dawn of the Renaissance, things were changing. The Renaissance was bringing a new secular world. And so these goddesses, artists started to bring the goddess down from heaven and put the woman right into the real life world of flowers and grass and trees, and show a flesh and blood woman rather than just a goddess. That's, you know, let's show this next clip, which has these beautiful series of tapestries that show how a woman representing the dawning of this late medieval, early Renaissance period, how these people were now experiencing the beauty of the sensual world.
This exquisite series captures Europe's blossoming appreciation for sheer beauty at the end of the Middle Ages. It's a celebration of all the senses. There's taste. A woman takes candy from a servant's dish to feed to her parakeet, while the little dog licks his lovingly woven chops. Hearing, the elegant woman plays sweetly on an organ, calming an audience of wild beasts. In this fanciful world, humans and their fellow creatures live in harmony in an enchanted garden. Sight. The unicorn cuddles up and looks at himself in the lady's mirror, pleased with what he sees. The lion turns away and snickers. Touch. That's the most basic and dangerous of the senses. Here, the lady strokes the unicorn's horn, and the lion looks out at us to be sure we get the double entendre. Medieval Europeans were enjoying the wonders and physical pleasures of life. The words on Our Lady's tent read, "To my sole desire." What is her only desire? Is it jewelry? Or is she putting the necklace away and renouncing material things? Is it God? Love? The unicorn and lion open the tent. Is she going in to meet the object of her desire? Or just stepping out to embrace the world?
Gene, I just love the exquisite sensuality of this. It's new. You don't think of people in the Middle Ages being sensual. You think of them just groveling around trying to survive, unless they happen to be high nobles.
Budding sensuality. It was a revolution at the time when it was happening, and it was something that would begin to snowball and carry on through the Renaissance and past the Renaissance, right up until the modern times. So, in fact, let's finish off our tour of of Venuses through history with one final clip, and in this one we'll take another leap through history. In fact, take another leap through history.
Time for another sip.
Sorry, Professor Balding, but we're going to do it. As we go now, and we leap forward about like 400 years to around the year 1900 to find 20th century Venuses and see what women look like there. To do it, we're gonna head right to the city of Vienna and the painter Gustav Klimt.
In opulent Vienna, this simmering hedonism came out in the sumptuous paintings of Gustav Klimt. Klimt favored sensual women, who he depicted as alternately noble, bewitching, mysterious, and dangerous. Like this biblical heroine with the head of her victim, a modern femme fatale. Here, Klimt's woman is no longer dominant, kneeling on a grassy precipice in a vast universe. The passionate couple is engulfed in colorful patterns and the golden glow of their desire. As the two patterned shapes flow together, the figures merge. The only thing that stands out clearly is the woman's face, eyes closed, cheeks flushed, as she succumbs to the pleasure of the kiss.
Oh boy, that is really, really, really nice. I love Klimt. Don't you like Klimt? He's a real crowd pleaser, I think.
Yes,
Gene, we got to take a little break here. I just want to thank our Monday Night Travel team. It's a luxury for me to be able to, I feel like I'm opening up my door and welcoming in 1,000 travelers every Monday night that I'm on. It's so much fun, and it couldn't happen without our team. Of course, Julianne is moderating tonight. Lisa is in the trenches, helping everybody out with their questions. We've got Gabe and we've got Ben also on our team. So the four of them are running Monday Night Travel. And I just love to come in about once a month and celebrate something I'm particularly into, like right now being with Jean. I do want to remind you that we'll have Q&A in a little while. So when we're done with this video clip, get your questions in. You can see the Q&A link there and ask a question. And Lisa and Julianne will get it together and we'll ask Jean when we get out of the videos. Also, I want to remind you that in the chat section, you've got all of the links for this week's show. And there's a lot of, I think, very worthwhile links that give you a connection with things we're talking about and so on. And one of those links is what's on sale this week. And that is this book, Europe 101, History and Art for the Travelers. Now, this book retails for $25, $24.95 actually. Tonight, I'd like to sell it for $5. That's 80% off. That is mind-blowing because we love you and because we have a lot of extra copies, okay? So this is 500 pages. The whole story is right here. And Gina and I wrote this book in the 1980s first after tour guiding and realizing we need our tourists to have some sort of a broad understanding of the art and the history so they can enjoy their sightseeing. This book was designed for smart people who were sleeping in their history and art classes before they knew they were going to Europe. Now they got a trip coming up and they wish they remembered who the Etruscans were. If you read 5 pages of information in here on Gothic architecture, I promise you, you can step into a Gothic cathedral, excitedly nudge your partner and say, isn't this a marvelous improvement over Romanesque? Wouldn't that be annoying? You can do that. You can be turned on by Gothic if you read this book. So this is, I just love this book because it's everything Jean and I wish all of our travelers knew before we take them on a tour. It's yours again for $5. All you got to do is go to the website, ricksteves.com, and you go into the web store and you go into guidebooks and then you roll down until you find books that you're going to read before you travel. And then you'll find this number one, and it's $5. A couple of weeks ago on Monday Night Travel, we did a blowout on this book and we sold 400 of them in just like that. And we had to turn it off because we were almost out of stock. Well, we've got a good stock for this one, but this is only a good deal for 24 hours. And after that, we turn it off. So if you'd like to get Europe 101, History and Art for the Traveler, this is Stuffy Balding's least favorite textbook. It's all yours for $5. Hey, I want to remind you next week, 1 week from tonight, it's Halloween. Where are you going to go in Europe on Halloween? Transylvania. And who's going to take you there? Cameron Hewitt. He's just been there. He loves Romania, and he's going to share with you the real and the legendary story of Count Dracula. 2 weeks from tonight, we will have been recovered from that traumatic experience, and we'll go to Northern England with one of our English guides, Robert Helcutt. Okay, we got lots of Monday night coming on, but right now, Jean, when you wrote the script, you must have had some particular interest, some point you wanted people to come away with. You got to be realistic about what will people come away with after a teaching adventure. What did you hope people would come away with when you wrote this 90-page script called Art of Europe?
Yeah, I hoped, and what we came up with is a show that shows the whole sweep of history, so that what would people come away with when they watch it? I think they would feel the emotions of the people who created and appreciated this art. Mm-hmm. So beyond just enjoying the beautiful art, you think about who's building these Gothic cathedrals and why are they doing it? And you appreciate the deep faith of these peasants who would, like Hunchback of Notre Dame, and be, laboring to move big bricks just to build this beautiful cathedral as a symbol of their devotion to God. Or you go into more recent times, into the Impressionist time, and you think of these revolutionary painters like the Impressionists, and how freeing it must have been for them to set up their easels outdoors and paint, wearing their berets and their scarves, and painting more what they feel, and without the stuffy confines of the studio that they'd been trained in. I'm hoping that people, when they watch this thing, will really understand this is why these are the people that made the art, and these are the people that appreciate it. And so when they see a piece of art, they'll get into these people's soul.
Gene, you nailed it. I hope people do. We worked for 2 years on this project, just writing it. I mean, filming it long before that. And we weren't sure it was going to work. Audacious is a good use. I don't use that word very often, but I'm so thankful that it does work. And you're talking about art that kind of becomes part of you. And I noticed I forgot to put out my kiss. And you see the ugly part on my wall back there where there's 3 little switches being shown. I've got to replicate my
Bear with him, folks.
my Klimt. We were just there. And I walk by this every morning when I go to work. And I'm just so thankful that there is so much art for us to enjoy. There's that. And I think what I want to do is turn on some light so you can enjoy the kiss. Hey, Gene, what you were talking about earlier, it's all tied in with this sort of, I think, humanism. And a point I wanted to make, you know, it's one of my pet things to teach, is how the Renaissance really could have been called humanism, I think. And that was the radical break. It's the new confidence that humankind has in its relationship with life, with what we can accomplish, with God. It's just it's the birthplace, the birthing of the modern world. How does that tie in?
Yeah, a confidence in the nobility and strength of and rationality of individual real life humans to plan their lives. Yeah, humanism is really the core of the Renaissance. And think about it, you know, it's the Renaissance, the year 1500. It's not just painters, it's not just Michelangelo and Leonardo and Raphael. By now, the Renaissance was spreading out from Italy, going global, going all over Europe, and it was affecting people in every field. You know, it wasn't just painters.
It's amazing when you think about it, who was living in this generation. I mean, we've got Columbus discovering America at the same time that Leonardo's discovering all sorts of stuff.
You got Martin Luther coming up with these radical new religious ideas.
And you got Gutenberg that can print up his stuff so people can read it affordably.
And they all interacted, you know, all across Europe. You know, think of it. You know, Michelangelo grew up in Florence. Go ahead. Yeah.
Before you do that, I just remembered we innovated this theory of ours, the class of 1500, a long time ago. And there's all these guys. Most of them made it to school on the day they shot the pictures for the yearbook. And that's the class right there. Gina and I just talked about a bunch of them, but it's curiously interconnected. They live all over Europe, but they're the cutting edge of the modern world. And they were the class of 1500. How connected were they?
Michelangelo grew up with the Medici kid, Giovanni, who grew up to become Pope Leo X. Now follow me here. Pope Leo X hired Raphael to paint. Raphael admired the great German painter, Albrecht Dürer. Dürer was good friends with the reformer Martin Luther, who was excommunicated by Pope Leo X.
Yeah.
It all connects somehow.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the connecting thing is that regardless of their field, they were all in some sense humanists. To really understand humanism that was so core to the Renaissance, I think the best way to define it is to think about what came before, the very unhumanistic period that came before in the Middle Ages. So, Rick, as you roll this clip, let's go to the Middle Ages and let's go to that dark world.
Throughout the Middle Ages, in the Romanesque age as well as the Gothic age that followed, art inspired. It comforted. And it frightened. Vivid Last Judgment scenes scared people into faithfulness. They showed the end of the world when Christ passes judgment on all humankind, giving the ultimate thumbs up or thumbs down. The righteous rise up to heaven, while the wicked are cast down into a horrible, horrible hell. ruled by the devil. There, they're tormented for eternity by demons, eaten by ogres, and excreted in an eternally miserable cycle. Across Europe and through the centuries, peasants were made fearful by this powerful art, subjected at church to such vivid visions from the moment they walked through the door.
You know, Gene, when I think about it, that sort of went out of style, that kind of heavy-handed, fear-mongering religion with the humanist age and the Renaissance. Where do we take it from here?
Yeah, the Renaissance changed all of that. There was a whole new way of looking at the world and of people looking at themselves. And because of that, there was a whole new art. What kind of art would best capture the humanistic spirit? Well, this time it's statues of men, in particular, in fact, naked men. So that's, in fact, what we're going to see in this next series of clips, is a series of clips of statues of men. In particular, they were the figure of David, the shepherd boy from the Bible. And as we look at each one, we can see how each of these different Davids epitomized a different era. Let's start with the early Renaissance, a work by Donatello, a statue of David that comes right on the heels of all that dark medieval period.
With his bronze David, Donatello helped revolutionize sculpture. Renaissance man now stands on his own. This is one of the first freestanding nudes sculpted in Europe in 1,000 years. While the formal subject is still biblical, David slaying the giant, truth be told, it's a classical nude, a celebration of the human body. Driven in part by artists, society was changing. A generation before, this would have been shocking. But with the Renaissance, it's art for art's sake, adorning not a church, but a noble family's courtyard.
Boy, Gene, when I look at that, I think, yeah, that's David, but that's also a study in a classical nude. It's a celebration of the human body, which really is tying in with all this humanism. We've been talking about it. And also when I look at it, Gene, I think lawyers at public television headquarters, because believe it or not, if you're going to produce a show on art, well, if you produce a show on anything, you have lawyers that look at it and flag it for nudity. If I understand it correctly, technically, if you show a gland that secretes a liquid, it is considered dirty, and by some standards, and it is literally flagged. And of course, where we live, you can show this kind of stuff, but there are communities in our country today that will not air this show until after bedtime, until after 10 o'clock, perpetuating this funny idea that the human body is a dirty thing and you can't see it until you get older and you're married or something like that. But Simon and I have been struggling with this for years. It's tough to show a lot of Europe without having to deal with that. But, you know, if you bring home a gland that secretes a liquid painted onto a canvas 300 years ago that's on a woman's chest, or a marble penis that was carved 500 years ago in Florence, it can offend people. But you can't do European art without this kind of culturally broadening exercise. And one thing you come away from all this art is recognizing the body is a beautiful thing, and artists throughout the ages have wanted to sculpt and paint the nude body. What is it about the nude body, do you think, that appeals to an artist?
I think it's because when you do someone that's nude, you're stripping away all of the contemporary accoutrements, like your dress and suddenly you become timeless. You become not just a single person here living in this place and time, dressed this way. Suddenly you become not just a man, you become man.
Man. And Rodin did it in the modern times. Vigeland did it. And, ancient Greek sculptors did it. It's all that same desire to show something more than Joe today, but man in a universal way, or woman.
And this Donatello statue was symbolic. It was important that he be naked. This Donatello's David, this is a boy, but he captured that kind of brash, fresh spirit of the early Renaissance. Compare that with a century later, and we get our next David. We'll see a clip of it later. But you can all picture, Michelangelo's David in your mind. He's big, he's 17 feet tall, he's confident, he's standing planted on the ground, he's gazing to the future. He symbolized that next era, the High Renaissance, with all that confidence. Now, in our next clip, we'll see yet the next era, the Baroque era, with a statue by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. His David sums up that period. And in this clip, it compares Bernini's Baroque David with Michelangelo's Renaissance David to get a sense of how these two eras were different.
By the way, to appreciate the boldness of Bernini's Baroque style, compare his version of David with Michelangelo's Renaissance David from a century earlier. Michelangelo's is poised, balanced, and thoughtful, perfect for the cerebral Renaissance era. Bernini's, on the other hand, is a Baroque action figure, his whole body wound like a spring as he prepares to slay the giant, showing the energy of the age. Bernini was a brash young man of 25 when he sculpted this, and the determined face of David is his own.
Yeah, Gene, I love it when you compare the same subject with an angle from different ages. And we do that several times in Europe 101 on sale tonight for $5. We do it because you can do it throughout the ages. You can look at medieval, you can look at Renaissance, you can look at Baroque, you can look at neoclassical. You got the same well-worn themes and subjects, but painted with a whole different psychology.
3 different Davids from 3 different eras that capture 3 completely different moods. Let's finish off these Davids with one of my favorites by the groundbreaking artist Caravaggio. This is a painting, but it gives a much grittier picture of David.
Caravaggio's David slaying the giant is no noble Renaissance hero, but a sassy teenager. The lighting is stark and dramatic, and the details are gruesome. David literally shoves the harsh reality in our face, and Goliath's head, it's none other than Caravaggio himself.
And with that, Caravaggio took the traditional Christian subject of David and put a completely modern spin on it and pointed art to a more secular future.
So we've seen so much right now. We've seen dripping heads, we've seen Venuses, we've seen
unicorns.
Unicorns. Where are we going next?
Well, let's go. Let's take a closer look. Well, where are we going next? Back to the Renaissance. It all ties back to the Renaissance. Now, if the Renaissance was all about humanism, in art, the foundation of humanism was realism. For painters and sculptors, the ability to be able to paint realistic, 3-dimensional people in their real life settings, in all their real life glory. And that was the big revolution, is because now people could see themselves and glorify and celebrate themselves. And it changed people's whole way of looking at things. Once again, the best way to really understand this radical ability to paint realistic art, let's go back to the period that came before, in medieval times, and we'll see the slow evolution as early Renaissance painters learned the difficult technique of painting and sculpting realistic objects.
And, I was thinking about the same thing, Gene, and I've also been thinking about how people climb mountains, and somebody will hike up to a certain place and do all the ropes and everything, then they have to go back down. And then they go quickly to there, and then they go further, and then they go further. And artists, especially when they broke out of medieval into Renaissance, it seems like they did that sort of a approach that every generation got a little closer to the summit. And I guess we're going to see that now.
Back in the Middle Ages, altarpieces were far from realistic. panels, like painted pages, told Bible stories, but with little sense of depth. To show Jesus' head leaning out, it actually does. Here, angels are stacked on top of each other with no concern for realistic depth. The throne is crudely drawn. It's as if Mary and baby Jesus exist somewhere in a golden Neverland. Mary, like a flat cardboard cutout, seems to float weightlessly. A decade later, this work takes a few baby steps forward. The throne, while still clunky, shows an attempt to create the illusion of depth. Mary's foot actually sticks out over the edge. But the angels, while now portrayed one behind the other, are still stacked, like heavenly bookends. The great leap forward was made by the pioneering late medieval artist Giotto. Still a century before the Renaissance, Giotto creates a spacious three-dimensional stage and then fills it. There's a realistic canopied throne surrounded by real bodies, angels in front, prophets behind, clearly defining its depth. Mary herself is monumental. You know there's a body under her robe.
It's so fun just to be hanging out, Gene, with you and talking about this stuff. Munching away and sipping our wine. You know, it's art.
It's beautiful just looking into Mary's face.
Look at that.
You know what inspired obviously what inspired these early Renaissance artists to paint realistically wasn't the medieval people. They didn't know how to do it. It was, once again, looking way back to the ancient world.
And I remember when I was learning about this for my first time in my ancient Greek art, or whatever the class was, the professor said, it was like he was trying to get people to drop out while they still could. He said, by the end of the quarter, I'll be able to show you any statue and you'll tell me what decade it was made. And I thought, can I get out of this class still, you know? But if you did your work, you had a good shot of identifying the Greek statues just by looking at them, statues you had never seen before, by its characteristics as they evolved toward that, from stiff to balanced realism. And then in the Middle Ages, we're seeing the same thing here, aren't we? You can date it almost to the generation by how good are they with this beginning attempt to merge art and science and math to show a believable three-dimensional scene on a two-dimensional surface.
That three-dimensional scene on a two-dimensional surface was really pioneered not by the Greeks, but by the Romans. The Romans, using frescoes and mosaic works, loved to paint everyday citizens and everyday scenes as realistically as possible. Let's see a clip of that.
While we often think of Roman art as grandiose, it was also intimate, especially when it decorated ancient homes. The wealthy covered their floors in what became a Roman specialty, mosaics. These are made from thousands of small, colorful stone tiles, laboriously pressed into wet cement. The Romans took mosaic making to the level of fine art. At first glance, these pictures look like paintings, but they're actually exquisite micro-mosaics made of thousands of tiny, pixel-like chips of stone and glass. Notice the natural poses, shading, perspective. This is the Roman realism that would inspire Renaissance artists over 1,000 years later in Florence.
You know, Gina, when you write about this stuff a lot, as we do in our guidebooks, you get your favorite words, and you have to be careful you don't use your favorite words too much, because then it becomes some sort of a joke on the internet. Like, I have a lot of words that I use that people will giggle every time I use them. One word I love to use is exquisite. It's and you can overuse it, but this micro mosaics of Rome was exquisite in its loving attention to detail and its realism. And when you think about realism, you've got this realism when it comes to idealism. You've got, you know, the contrapposto Venuses that we saw from ancient Greece, and you'd go, wow, that's so realistic. They understand how the shoulders and the hips work together as she moves or walks.
But in a way, it's not realistic. I think this is what you're getting at, is because it's so ideal.
Exactly.
her proportions are perfect.
Yeah.
Her face is almost generic. It's so
Right.
like she's got too much makeup on. Yeah, that is one strand of humanism, is to idealize human beings like gods. But there was another strand of humanism that was going on too, especially when you get out of Italy and up to the Northern Renaissance.
Right.
And that was trying to paint a little bit grittier view of things, to show everyday people with warts and all their unique eccentricities. And what was humanistic about it is they just celebrated that.
An intimate, honest, candid slice of life. That would be, you could sum up a lot of Northern values that way, and we'll see that right now.
The undisputed master of the slice of life scene was the Flemish artist Peter Bruegel the Elder. He captured the rustic simplicity of country folk at play. Where the Italian Renaissance depicted strong, noble heroes, Northern artists like Bruegel celebrated humanity's quirks and poked fun at its foibles. At this peasant wedding, farmers scramble for their share of the free food. Two men bring in fresh pudding on a tray. Another passes the bowls down. A kid licks his fingers, while the bagpiper pauses to check it all out. Amid the feeding frenzy, almost forgotten, sits the demure bride. At this farmer's dance, there's not a saint in sight, but there's still a moral. The bagpipes symbolized hedonism. So here, the church is ignored, while the piper gets all the attention.
Musicians.
It's a timeless scene, timeless
Sure
slice
is.
of life.
Look at that. Oh,
Celebrating ordinary people and everyday life. There was another Northern artist a century later who took that kind of that Renaissance celebration of earthly life even one step further, painting the ordinary details of his hometown in Holland. And that, of course, is Johannes Vermeer.
Here, Johannes Vermeer, the master of tranquility and stillness, shows an intimate street from his hometown of Delft. In his quiet painting of a humble milkmaid, Vermeer creates a scene where we can almost hear the trickle of the pouring milk, capturing the beauty of everyday things.
Gene, you wrote that line, must be 20 years ago or something. You could almost hear the trickle of that milk. I don't even know if you remember that. Do you?
Oh, I probably did. Yeah.
I mean,
It was a
I
long
know you
time ago.
did. I know you did, because
Yeah.
I use it all the time, and I always feel like putting a little credit to you, but I don't. But your observations are just so beautiful, and I'm so thankful to be able to cobble them all together in the work that we do, so other people can be there and appreciate this stuff.
And I just got to throw this in here too. I was just over, like I said, in Amsterdam with my son. We had an apartment, and we're in Amsterdam, and this is a city of 1 million people, but you walk out of your apartment and it's like you're walking into a Vermeer painting. It's beautiful. It's still today. Anyway, play the clip.
Absolutely.
It's great.
It's just
And here, Vermeer draws the curtain to reveal the artist at work. The floor tiles lead the viewer in to where he's painting a model. The studio is a small world unto itself, filled with beautiful and symbolic details. The map of Holland celebrating its trading power. The golden chandelier, a mark of new wealth. His fine clothing, everything is crystal clear, lit by a soft, cool light. The model's caught in a candid pose, while the artist, his back to his audience, is just another hard-working Dutchman plying his craft.
Gene,
Yeah.
it's so quiet. It's so simple. It's so
So-
beautiful.
It's so, and yet also so simple, and yet also so revolutionary.
Yeah.
Ordinary people being painted and being celebrated, not just the nobility. And this was the big change that was coming, so that by the 1800s you had a rising class of middle class people, and they were looking around going, hey, we're pretty good too. It was like humanism had now really snowballed, and these people were looking around going, we have a right to to a voice in society, and the art was reflecting that.
Gene, we haven't talked about this before, but throughout the Middle Ages, that pie of society was three slices: the nobility, the clergy, and the peasantry, and then all of a sudden you got this middle class, and the city merchants and bankers and so on,
and painters
painters. They didn't fit in that, and politically and economically, you get the French Revolution, but you also get some sort of a revolution in art that really pays attention to the new dynamic order in society that's breaking out of that old regime.
People were demanding freedom from tyranny and also freedom to express themselves and their emotions. And that comes out really clear in this next painter, the great Francisco Goya.
The Romantic Spanish painter Francisco Goya was an artist with a social conscience and a political agenda. As a successful painter of royal portraits, he dutifully recorded their extravagant finery, but also their famously clueless faces. He painted the idle rich at play while also branching into more serious subjects. He explored the most extreme of emotions, grotesque scenes of madness and pain, revealing the dark side of the human condition. And he boldly depicted the painful reality of foreign oppression. First, the brave Spanish resistance, and then the brutal aftermath, when the soldiers of the French emperor, a faceless firing squad, mow down the revolutionaries, idealistic freedom fighters, one by one. Bodies fall, blood stains the ground. Men cover their eyes in horror. In the darkness, Goya throws a dramatic light on the next victim, a nameless peasant, the common man, who becomes a hero. He spreads his arms and asks, why? This masterpiece of the Romantic style, vivid brushwork, stark shadows, distorted features so full of human drama, expressed the anguish of Europe's masses longing to be free.
Whoa. Gene, it's so, like you said, when we attempted to write the art of Europe, it turns out it is a story. It does, even today with it unfolds.
The history and the art are completely intertwined. The art just illustrates the passions of the people living through these things.
I love it. I was thinking yesterday we were here together just kind of figuring out what the heck we're going to talk about tonight for an hour and a half. And I was thinking in 1972, it was 50 years ago today, we gathered
at the band to play.
We gathered in front of Gene's house in the street at midnight because tomorrow morning it was a pep rally and we were in charge of putting together a skit. And I enjoyed the collaboration then. And this is before either of us had ever really gone to Europe or done any of this kind of stuff. And I'm so thankful I've had you as a sort of a creative partner ever since then. But now we have that kind of fun making this art come true. And I just want to thank you for that, Gene. I mean, if I think of three of my favorite books over the ages, they've got your name on the cover. It's Rick and Gene. And, the first book we wrote, I think this is the second book I ever wrote. We co-authored it after I wrote Europe Through the Back Door. I wrote Europe Through the Back Door in 1980. I think this was 1984. And we wanted to tell this story that we're telling now to our country, thanks to public television and having the wherewithal to put this 6-hour TV show together. But this 500-page story takes you from the pyramids to Picasso with all of the fun that Gene brings to this story. And I just want to remind people again, I bought a whole stack of these from my publisher, thinking I can blow through these and have a lot of fun with them. And I was thinking about an event like this. If you'd like this book, again, it's normally $25 in the bookstore. It's $5 today on our website. This is only good for 24 hours. So if you'd like to check out the story of art, history, and art, as Gene was just saying, it goes together, history and art for the traveler. Gene, shortly after that, we wrote a book together, which I would use to advertise by saying this is Europe's 20 most exhausting and obligatory cultural must-sees. And it's all the things you got to do. You got a copy right there on your mantle.
Yeah, this is, I don't know, earlier or later edition. I don't remember which.
I don't know, but they're both out of print right now because nobody wants to carry around a book when you can put it on your phone. And you and I have taken the heart and soul of this book, and actually the content, the tours, and we've turned it into audio tours. And this has been a huge hit. And it's in part, it's a huge
because they're free. Yeah.
They're free. Yeah, I know that sort of undercuts how successful they are.
Sorry.
But we do have tens of thousands of people popping us in their ears. And you've got the tours that Gina and I put together in Mona Wings, Europe's 20 most exhausting and frightening cultural obligations. Now there's over 60 of them. And Gina and I have been working really hard this year in bringing them all up to date. So for your travels in 2023, we'll have a sweeping upgrade of the app, Rick Steves Audio Europe. And it's free. You can download it now. We update it routinely, and it is really a blessing for a lot of people that would like to have a private guide taking them through all these sites, but don't want to hire a private guide. You've got us, and we will give you all the same juvenile jokes and the same fascinating insights into the art of Europe if you would like. Another project Gina and I did more recently is Europe's top 100 masterpieces. And we've got this for sale. It's not on the $5 sort of blowout deal as Europe 101, but this book has been a real hit. And we wrote it just before COVID hit. And Gina and I decided something we'd long want to do, choose our favorite 100 masterpieces. You got your biggies, the predictable ones, but you've also got a lot of other ones that one of us have a particular passion for. And what I like about this is you've got a full color photograph, and then you've got the text. And Jean wrote an amazing 500 or 600 word essay, an artfully crafted essay. And then we've put together all of our favorite art here. And Jean, a cool thing about this project is it kind of tells the same thing of Europe 101, but in a bite size, one little masterpiece at a time. But we decided to put it together in chronological order. And I remember reading through the book before I went to the printer thinking, what a delightful way to explore the sweep of the story of Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were just fanning through the pages and you look at the art flashing by, I kind of got that sense of this being sort of like a little kinescope of our TV show.
Yes. Now, Jean, I've been thankful to have you as a co-author on so many of our projects at Rick Steves Europe. You have dedicated a lot of your effort in a solo undertaking, and that is a guidebook to something you're passionate about, not a guidebook, a novel about Michelangelo. I understand it's not finished, it's not gone to the publisher yet, but give us a little sense of your interest in Michelangelo.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could plug the hell out of the book at some other time. It's called Michelangelo at Midlife, and it really fits into what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. You know, Michelangelo, what connects people to Michelangelo, yeah, it's his art. It's that, but it's people have a sense of the passion that he brought to it, and that what he was creating was coming not just because he was getting paid to do it, not just because it was a job, but that all of his art was a personal expression. And that's a lot of what my book is about, is reading it's little known that Michelangelo was actually, he's known as a sculptor, a painter, an architect, but he was also a, pretty darn good poet. And he's got hundreds of poems around, and reading them, some of them are more intimate and personal than you would expect coming from somebody of that time. You really get a sense of who this man is. And in some ways he was, we talk about the Renaissance being the linchpin of history. Well, Michelangelo was the pivot point of artists. He drew from the past, but he also was pointing the way to the future, inspiring later art. He was the first name artist, and he was inspiring later artists to explore their creativity and turn it into great art. To continue on with this. In fact, for the rest of this of our show here, we're going to be not looking back again anymore. We're not going to look back. We're going to go from the Renaissance and take it right up to modern times. And the starting point for so much of this was that great Renaissance artist, Michelangelo, Buonarroti.
As a multi-talented Renaissance man, Michelangelo made his mark as a world-class sculptor, painter, and architect. As an architect, he designed and created this memorial chapel for his patrons, the Medici, a harmonious ensemble of innovative architecture, tombs, and sculpture. As a sculptor, Michelangelo believed his figures were already divinely created within the stone. He was simply chiseling away the excess. These rough and unfinished statues seem to be struggling like prisoners to free themselves from the marble. They show the Renaissance love of the body as, with his chisel, Michelangelo reveals these compelling figures. Barely 25 years old, Michelangelo established his genius by sculpting this Pietà, adored by centuries of pilgrims. With powerful realism, Michelangelo made it clear to the faithful: Jesus is dead. The theological point of this work: he gave his life for our salvation. Mary's crumpled robe accentuates Christ's smooth body, helping make hard stone look soft as skin. Great art that delivers an emotional punch is no accident. That's its purpose, and it does so by design. He created perhaps his greatest work in the Pope's Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo depicted no less than the entire history of the Christian world, from the creation to the first people, and much later to the final event in history, the awe-inspiring Last Judgment. Michelangelo painted God busy creating from every conceivable angle. And the centerpiece, the central act of creation, God passing the divine spark of life to his greatest masterpiece, you and me.
Whoa, what a humanistic, finale. I mean, think of the body of work of Michelangelo with all we've just seen, and think of what an amazing, groundbreaking genius, I was going to say artistic genius he was to actually produce it from his heart, not from what would make his career better or that kind of thing, but just what a unique, I would imagine unique at that time, Gene, personal statement.
Yeah, before Michelangelo, being an artist was being an anonymous craftsman. And Michelangelo was one of the first name artists and one of the first people for whom it was important to make art that reflected his own life. Right. That's what I think connects people so much to Michelangelo is yes, it's his art, but it's also Michelangelo the man.
You know,
there's one other artist.
He's beloved for that, isn't he?
He is, and he passed it along to future artists. And it's like Michelangelo reaching out across and saying, here's the spark of genius. Now go forth and create great art, and great art from the heart. The other artist I can think of that's equally as popular as Michelangelo might be Vincent van Gogh. And again, it's not that Van Gogh was such a great technical, so accomplished. It's that you get a sense of Van Gogh's life by looking at his art. Because when life and art come together, it can create a great personal statement. Let's take a look at Van Gogh.
The boldest of these post-impressionists was Vincent van Gogh. For Van Gogh, his life and art were intertwined. A humble pastor's son from a small Dutch town, he spent time helping poor coal miners in search of his calling. He gave farm laborers the same dignity usually afforded aristocrats. Through his art, he portrayed a vibrant world he felt so intensely. He moved to Paris, and the City of Light opened up a whole new world of color. Vincent hobnobbed with the Impressionists. He studied their bright colors, rough brushwork, and everyday scenes. He painted shimmering reflections like Monet, cafe snapshots like Degas, still lifes like Cézanne, and self-portraits like nobody else. He set out for the south of France, energized by the sun-drenched colors and the breathtaking vistas. In just 2 years, Vincent produced an explosion of canvases. Sunshine, rolling hills, the patchwork farms. Working in the open air, he feverishly painted the landscape, the simple workers, and the starry, starry nights. His unique style, thicker paint, brighter colors, and swirling brushwork made everything he painted pulse with life. Vincent's ecstasy alternated with dark times. He painted the loneliness of his own room. He drank too much and suffered bouts of depression. He was admitted to a local hospital where he found peace painting calm scenes of nature. But it seems he also wrestled with his inner demons, capturing spiritual scenes with surreal colors, twisted forms, and dark outlines. In one of his last works, the canvas is a wall of thick paint, with roads leading nowhere and ominous crows taking flight. Overwhelmed with life, Vincent walked into a field like this one and shot himself. With his paintings, Van Gogh, though unappreciated in his own time, inspired his fellow artists to seek a new kind of beauty.
Gene,
Wow. Yeah.
wow. Starry Night is so powerful, yet it's so different from what we were just celebrating with Michelangelo's powerful art at the Sistine Chapel. And I was wondering, imagine if Michelangelo could go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And imagine if Michelangelo, even better, could sit down and have a beer with Van Gogh. What do you think he'd say?
I think he'd say, hey, Vinny, let me tell you, I love the passion you're bringing, but try and, smooth out you're laying the paint on too thick, smooth it out a little bit. Take a few art lessons, because you got to just get it right if you want the painting to be realistic.
Okay, well, then I would say, and I don't know a Dutch accent, so I'll say Van Gogh's going to parrot Michelangelo with a fake Italian accent. And you go, Mickey, we have cameras now. Who cares about reality, photo reality? We got cameras.
Yeah. Yes. And the camera was, now suddenly you had a camera. It was a machine that could do something better than any artist ever could do. And, and it could have made artists completely obsolete, but the reverse was true. It freed them up. It freed them up to turn art more into a form of personal expression. You think about this group of artists that Van Gogh was so inspired by, and was kind of part of, whose motto was not, they weren't going to sit in the studio and meticulously paint every detail and get everything right in perfect lighting. Instead, they burst out of the studio, and their motto was out of the studio and into nature. Of course, talking about the Impressionists.
The Impressionists painted the French countryside, but the true subject wasn't so much the farms, rivers, and forests. It was all about the light. They even studied which pigments would reproduce reflected light most accurately. And when the light was just right, they painted furiously to catch the scene before it was gone. The way the light reflected off the passing clouds, the waving grass, the billowing dress. The father of Impressionism was Claude Monet. The son of a grocer with little formal education, he dedicated his life to discovering new ways of seeing things. With this quick impression of a harbor at sunrise, Monet helped give the movement its name. The real subject, the impression of the light reflected on the water, rendered in a few squiggly lines or broad strokes of paint. Impressionists used an innovative technique. They applied bright colors in thick dabs side by side on the canvas and let them mix as they traveled to your eye. Up close, it's a mess, but move back and voila! Since the colors never completely resolve, they continued to vibrate in the mind, giving Impressionist paintings their shimmering vitality.
Gene, it's like the Impressionist movement had the key to the jail, and it let out everybody. It's the last time everybody was held together in kind of an artistic tribe. And from now on, we just get all of these crazy isms, don't we, after that?
Yeah, the next generation, the post-Impressionists, for them, the important thing was the creative freedom, and it was to forge their unique personal style. So each one had their own way of doing brushwork and technique to give their own unique look, starting with the great Georges Seurat.
Georges Seurat took the Impressionist technique to its logical conclusion, reducing the brushstroke to a brush dot. This was pointillism. All the dots would blend in the eye like a shimmering mosaic of reflected light. Paul Cézanne built his scenes not with dots, but with thick slabs. His subjects were simple and familiar, objects reduced to their basic geometrical forms: circular apples, rectangular houses, and people posed in triangles. By simplifying reality into fundamental shapes, Cézanne inspired future artists to see ordinary things in a new way.
Oh, Gene, watching that, I'm reminded of what a delight it was to be legal in the Orsay Gallery on the day it's closed. I mean, it's a frustrating thing for tourists to get to Paris on Tuesday or whatever that day is, and they can't go to the Orsay. Why is it closed? Well, it's because people like us with TV cameras are in there doing their work. We were free to go anywhere we wanted. We had a wonderful, easygoing attendant from the, the administration there. And we had our script, and we had to get this, we had to get that, we had to get this. And the Orsay in Paris is just a wonderland for that. I was one happy tour guide and one happy TV producer, I'll tell you.
That's great.
So, well, right now, clearly, Renaissance realism has been, it's down for the count, it seems like.
Well, yes and no, because painters, even as wild as these new styles were, and pushing the boundaries of creative freedom, almost all of modern artists had a very strong foundation in Renaissance realism. Mm-hmm. And that's it's probably no truer than of the towering figure of 20th century art. For many people, one of the wildest artists that's out there, Pablo Picasso.
All right.
Even as a teenager, Picasso had exceptional talent, capturing the human anatomy brilliantly, learning the rules he would later break. His early self-portraits show great self-awareness, and he could paint realistically while conveying great feeling. Young Picasso moved to turn-of-the-century Paris, where he went bohemian, making friends with poets, prostitutes, and fellow artists. He experimented with many different styles, painting impressionist landscapes like Monet, posters like Toulouse-Lautrec, still lifes like Cézanne, and the bright colors of Van Gogh. Times of grief and depression led to his blue period, paintings of society's outcasts that matched his mood.
Wow, I got to just say, one of the great joys for me, Gene, and you didn't have this privilege, I got to go over there and choose which ones of the pieces of art we shot, so there's a lot of great Picasso. And I've got 5 or 6 Picassos I really love, and they were all in that little montage. It was so good. And then we worked really hard to set these on cameras up. Like right here, this is in the tiny square right next to the, what's it called? The Bateau
Lavoie, yeah, where Picasso lived when he was inventing Cubism, just a struggling bohemian.
And you know that, but most of our viewers aren't going to realize that. But we had to go a long way to get to this bench, and we had to wait a long time for the bench to get free so I could sit there in front of Picasso's little slum where he lived with his buddy George Braque, right?
Yes.
He emerged from his blues. Picasso took on his next challenge. Here in Paris, he and his friends created art freed from convention, pioneering a whole new way to look at the world, Cubism.
And by the way, Gene, what you're doing with this show right now, to me, is like cubism. You break it and you put the shards of it up and you look at it in a different way.
In a different way. Yeah, the same old pieces, but in a different order.
So we've worked very hard to make this nice cohesive flow, and you totally brutalized it and you glued it to the wall, and now we're enjoying it in a cubist kind of way.
We are the Picassos of TV production.
Yeah.
With cubism, increasingly the subject, like say a person, dissolves into its visual building blocks. It's like cubists shattered a three-dimensional reality and then reassembled the shards onto a two-dimensional canvas. Cubism shows multiple perspectives at the same time on a flat surface. We might see the front and side view on a single face. The foreground and background blend together into a flat pattern. Increasingly, what mattered was not the subject itself, but how we see it. Picasso and his fellow artists innovated bold new styles that freed us to see the world in new ways. The notion of representational art, painting things the way they look, that had guided Europe for centuries, was breaking up.
Gene, this reminds me, one of my favorite quotes from Picasso is in one of his beautiful galleries you'll see when you're in the Mediterranean part of Europe. And you got all these far out, kind of childish paintings on the wall. And he wrote on the wall, it says his quote, "As a child, I learned to paint like an adult. And as an adult, I finally learned to paint like a child."
Like a
And
child.
he was
Yeah.
80 years old when he did these things. And we saw the
Yeah.
stuff he did when he was 15 years old. It was like, I wish I could paint something like that as an adult. But then he was freed, wasn't he, to get away from that?
Yeah, it was, and when you simplify reality the way Picasso eventually did, there's something very sparkling and brilliant about that
Mhm.
really resonates with people. You know, in some ways, using these cubist shattered shards, abstract techniques, surrealistic images, bright, unrealistic colors, in some ways, that can communicate to people even better because it's not painting the real world realistically, but it's painting that unseen world, the magical world, the world of mystery, religious ideas, the world of deep emotions. That's what I think is great about Picasso's really good friend there in the south of France, in the paintings of Marc Chagall.
And Gene, when we think about Marc Chagall, now that you just gave that setup, it just occurred to me, he had a lot he wanted to say deep down in his tradition, his childhood, his beloved homeland, his faith, everything, love. He was all about love. And he just turned it loose he turned off the gravity and it all scrambled together up in the sky.
He took his life and his emotions, and he made a collage of it on the canvas.
The Russian-born painter Marc Chagall used the abstract to create windows into the unseen spiritual world. With deceptively childlike simplicity, heavy outlines spilling over with brilliant colors, Chagall celebrated nature and its creator. His scenes, while often biblical, were lighter-than-air collages of his own life as well. His childhood in a humble village, his Jewish upbringing, the idea that God is everywhere, in everyday things. Chagall's mystical world featured flying animals, angels, and lovers twirling blissfully in midair. To Chagall, people loving each other mirrored God's love of creation. He wrote, "In art as well as in life, anything is possible, provided there is love." With Fauvist colors, cubist shards, and a surrealistic lack of gravity, Marc Chagall created an enchanting world.
Gene, for me as a tour guide and a teacher and a TV producer, it's so great to be able to put a show together. We can only do this in public broadcasting because we can assume an attention span and respect people's intelligence and really kind of do some challenging content, I think. But to be able to say with Fauvist colors, cubist shards, and a surrealistic lack of gravity, Marc Chagall created an enchanting world. Anybody who's paid attention to our show will know what those things were. I wouldn't know about them if I hadn't have been tuned into this stuff. And it's just beautiful to be able to do that. And together right now in the last hour, we've been able to love Botticelli, Vermeer, and Chagall. So we're all over the artistic map, baby. Bring it back to the Renaissance, please.
Bring it back. Yeah, I can connect. I can bring it back to the Renaissance. But wait. Okay. Chagall, Picasso, all this wild stuff. Yeah, but that had already been done back in the Renaissance. So let's take it back to a Northern Renaissance painter who combined so many of the elements that we've seen in this show. He had medieval motifs, so he was looking back. He had Renaissance techniques, and he was looking ahead with a modern perspective. And he put it all together with a completely free spirit. And I'm talking, of course, about the great Northern Renaissance painter, Bosch.
500 years ago, one Flemish painter, Hieronymus Bosch, took the Northern Renaissance in a direction that seems radical even today. His Garden of Earthly Delights, a 3-paneled altarpiece, or triptych, shows the delights of the world and where those temptations lead. In Act 1, man and woman are born innocent in the Garden of Eden, blessed by a kind God. But then, foolish people chase after earthly delights, a pursuit that is ultimately a vicious cycle. They're lured by the world's pleasures. Eating, drinking, sex. Like the fleeting flavor of that fruit, strawberries everywhere symbolize how the delights of hedonism are soon gone. Two lovers are suspended in a bubble. Then, in the third panel, the bubble pops. The moral of the story? Those party animals are heading straight to hell, a burning post-apocalyptic wasteland where sinners are led off to eternal torment. Every sinner gets an appropriate punishment. Gluttons are themselves consumed over and over. Good-time musicians are tortured by their own instruments. Gamblers have their party forever crashed. And a lecher gets sexually harassed by a pig-faced nun. Amid it all, a face peers out of this bizarre nightmare. A self-portrait of the artist.
Bosch.
Bosch.
Gee, I don't know. I gotta just say, I love that. And I just love everything about it. Now, that was 500 years ago, right?
Yes.
Imagine if Bosch was here today without the straitjacket of his times, if he was free to do what's going on today. Can you imagine that?
He would feel right at home today. So let's just follow up with a clip that kind of shows what brings it right up to the 21st century and shows what some of the modern day Bosches and Van Goghs and Michelangelos are doing in the world today. Run it.
Artists with increasing American influence were blazing new frontiers in expression. No longer limited to traditional canvases and statues, they worked with non-traditional materials. They traded paintbrushes for blowtorches. Art played with the eye. It was interactive. It engaged all the senses. Light became art. And so did cartoons. Pop art became high art. Flowers became puppies. Little boys became big boys. It was experimental, it was experiential, and it was fun.
Oh, baby, what a journey. Man,
We have covered thousands of years of history, from Greece to Rome to medieval.
Venuses to medieval Marys.
To Davids.
The Davids and Davids and Davids,
and
baby.
Davids and Davids and Davids and pig-faced nuns,
Unicorns.
lighter than air lovers.
Oh, I love it. Strawberries of sex.
Yes.
We've got Renaissance humanism, we've got Orientalism, Impressionism, we've dabbled in Cubism. It's a lot.
And it all, in some weird way, at least in our minds, connects to the Renaissance.
And Gene, that's a perfect setup for this. We have a little clip, and it's the one piece of our production that we farm out to some fancy organization, fancy company that does these high-tech kind of openings. It's just a little 30-second show opener. And I just love it because it lets us make our own connections. Everything is swirling together as we've done tonight. And let's just look at this as we sort of wrap up our little adventure through the story of European art. Yeah, Gene.
That's great.
Hey, that was a lot of fun, Gene. Thank you
Yep.
so much for joining us. We were gonna sort of we advertised this gathering tonight as we're gonna get high on art with Gene, and I've been kind of high on art just by enjoying this and sharing this with you. It's so much.
It's been intoxicating.
It really has.
It's been invigorating.
So thanks a lot, Gene. And I just appreciate everybody watching tonight. I want to remind you, if you'd like to get the whole sweep, it's a 6-hour special. It's airing on public television all over the country right now. And Gene, thanks a lot. Hey, let's go back to Julianne. And I believe we've got a chance for some questions.
Yes, we have some great questions. And I think I agree. I hear that echo. I'm not sure why. Let's see. But okay, it's gone away now. I agree that it was an intoxicating show. But before we get to the questions, could we have a word from our sponsor, Rick?
Well, sure. Thank you very much, Julianne. We are, the three of us work in a company called Rick Steves Europe. There's about 100 of us, and we are so thankful to be through COVID and still standing. We are so thankful to have a good year, 2022. We've updated just about all of our guidebooks, and they're all going to be post-COVID for 2023 travels. We've got our new show, our new series airing all over the country, and our tour program is back in the saddle. I mean, we took 25,000 people around Europe in 2019, 0 in 2020, 0 in 2021. And this year we took another 1,000 tours, 40 different itineraries, and 25,000 happy travelers around Europe, enjoying teachers and inspiration like we've just got to know Gene Openshaw a little bit here. We've got 100 guides that love the art and the culture and the story of Europe just as much as Gene and I do. And we are so excited about our program next year. So we've got a big program coming up next year. We're probably about 80% sold for next year. But my staff just told me that we have some early departures that have seats available in, February and March. There are select departures that are on sale right now. So if you'd like to get a deal on a tour and go in February or March, go to ricksteves.com in the tour section and check that out. I do want to remind people we're going to do every January before COVID, we invited people to come to Seattle for our Test Drive a Tour Guide Festival. This coming January, instead of having people come to Seattle, we're going to host a 21-night travel festival. Every night it's going to be a little mini Monday night travel, 7 nights a week for 21 days. And each night will feature a different itinerary with guides from that region. I'm working on the PowerPoints right now. It's going to be a real festival. And whether you're taking one of our tours or just loving to travel, it'll be free and it'll be a lot of fun. So remember that coming up in January. And I do want to remind you that we're going to cause a lot of commotion in our warehouse in the next 24 hours. This book, Europe 101, History and Art for the Traveler, with all of the, 500 pages of what Gene and I would love for you to know before you go on your trip. Gene, just look at all these fun stories about art. I'm just going to go to...
There's a lot of facts in there.
There's a lot of facts, a lot of photos. That's yours for $5, not $25 like you pay in the bookstore, but $5. If you want to go to our website, that blowout is only good for 24 hours. So go to ricksteves.com and check that out. There you go. That's a word from our sponsor. And now I want a word from our travelers who might have a question for Jean.
Yes, well, our first question has to do with Europe 101, actually. And it's from Anne. And she mentioned how earlier when you were talking about Europe 101, Rick, you said that by reading that book, you can be turned on by Gothic. And she wondered which era of art turns you on the most, Rick and Jean.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is good. Yeah, I'm a medieval kind of guy myself. I love it. I'm kind of a monk. I'm kind of a yeah.
Is that right?
So I think that's the period that strangely touches me the most. I love going into a Gothic church and where you're just it's a completely in situ experience. You're surrounded by great architecture, the soaring arches. You're surrounded by great statues, altarpieces, paintings, carved pulpits, and oftentimes, and the stained glass, the radiating through of the stained glass, and oftentimes there's even music in there, and throw in a little bit of incense and a few people who are sitting there praying, and hey, it's an exhilarating experience. It's a total immersive, interactive art experience.
Now, Jean, you have the ability to make that immersive and interactive, and that is the challenge for the typical traveler, to let themselves go loose, to step into one of those spaces, to climb that dark spiral staircase up to the greatest Gothic interior anyway, the little chapel that was built to house the crown of thorns 800 years ago by the French king, the Sainte-Chapelle, and to be bathed in glorious stained glass light. But that doesn't do anything for me. What really turns me on are Botticelli girls. When I was in college, is it okay to say this? I hope it's not going to get me in trouble, but I had a thing for girls that looked like they were painted by Botticelli. And because I just love that Botticelli kind of Renaissance sense of beauty, Yeah. So
long,
I love
flowing hair. Yeah.
The Renaissance thing. I like propaganda art also. I love divine monarch art, Louis XIV stuff. God said I get to rule you, and you just got to obey. Even propaganda art from the Soviet Union, even propaganda art from, I got to say it, the Mussolini and Hitler. I just find art grabs you, and it can be abused or it can be used for beautiful things, but it illustrates how powerful art can be. All right.
Our second question is from Deanna. And as you both mentioned at the end of the show tonight, we saw Davids and Davids and Davids. And she was wondering, which David is your favorite? It could be a statue or a painting.
Ooh.
I got to go with the old classic, Michelangelo. I'm sorry. I'm old school.
You wrote the book on Michelangelo, so I can understand that. I'm interested in Donatello's David because that was the first, they say that was the first male nude sculpted in 1,000 years. And I just feel like it must have just been breathtaking, so titillating to have that out there. And that still people were just infatuated with the human body and this pent up humanism, but you still had to cloak it in a Bible story to get away with it, and to look at Donatello's David and to think it was sculpted for, Jean, wasn't it? It was sculpted for like a rich man to put in his courtyard or in his garden instead of to decorate a church.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, so it was a breakthrough David, but to each his own David.
Caroline is wondering, she said, it's often said that great art comes from suffering. Do you think the challenges of the Middle Ages led to the blossoming of art in the Renaissance?
Wow.
Jean, that's got Jean's name written all over it.
That's a thoughtful question. Boy, great suffering produces great art. Yeah, I can see that. When you look at a lot of the medieval art, it looks almost like the expressions on the faces of some of the Madonnas and some of the saints. It isn't one of joy.
Right.
I think it's a sort of stoic way of getting through it. And I think this is sort of their way of rising above and creating these placid looking Marys and placid looking saints that express a sense that somehow we're going to get through this if you just have faith.
Well, that was kind of the whole theme, wasn't it? Life is miserable, but it's going to be okay. And then all of a sudden, with humanism, this goes back to humanism again. Hey, life is good right now. Get out there and embrace it. That was such an exciting time, and it doesn't just happen. And you've got to. You could say, does that suffering bring good art? I think freedom is the result of hard work, and freedom and creative freedom and political freedom and economic freedom. All of that, you can see that struggle as you track the story of our civilization through the art that it made.
Yeah.
Sarah wonders, when did your passion for both of you for art develop? Was there a defining moment, or did it kind of develop over time?
Yeah, for me, it was our first, Rick, you and I traveled to Europe when I was 17, you were 18.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it hit me. I'd grown up in basically a blue collar family and didn't have any real exposure to anything like this, to high culture. And then you go over to Europe and you're just baptized in it immediately. It's just all around you. And Rick, you and I can't say that it jumped out at me and I just loved it immediately,
Mm-hmm.
but it was so different. And I felt like this was something that I had to learn about and had to master if I was going to consider myself an adult, an intelligent, authentic adult.
Gene, I know you well enough to know that would have been your approach to that. I've got to learn this and master this because it's there. It's there to be appreciated, but you got to earn it. And I think I was that way too. I remember when we were there as teenagers, I remember a feeling of obligation. I had to go to these museums because my mom said, if you're going all the way to Europe, you got to go to that museum and you got to see this gallery and you got to, and I went there thinking like it's a crime not to. And then I was surrounded by people looking like they're having a good time. And I was convinced they were faking it like I was. How could anybody enjoy this stuff? Franz Hals, and then I, like Gene, I set myself to try to figure it out because I'm humble enough to know that if I don't appreciate it, I don't know enough about it. And by learning more about it, all of a sudden I realized the more I take to it, the more I get out of it. And now I'm eager, I'm hungry to take more to it so I can take more from it. And this has kind of been a theme of mine lately. And that's the theme of me and Gene as we produce this TV show. It was a lot of work to make this show. But if people can watch this show and really internalize it, they're going to enjoy the art more. I've built my whole career on budget tricks. How are you going to save money here and there, get a better value there? I'll tell you the best value around. Learn more about the art before you travel halfway around the world to see it, and it'll knock your socks off. But if you're going all the way over there to take a selfie in front of Mona Lisa, just stand in front of a cardboard cutout and fake it, because it's about the same thing.
We, of course, saw Vincent van Gogh's art this evening. And Kathy was wondering, why do you think some artists like Van Gogh are not appreciated during their time? Is their mentality ahead of the masses, or do you have any ideas?
Yeah, well, I will say you have the Academy, Gene, the Academy in Paris. If you want to be appreciated in your time, read what works, produce that, make your money, and be invited to all the galas. But if you want to be a creative success, don't worry about what works right now. Produce what's in your heart. And if you're wrong, you'll be dead. You won't even know it. But if you're right, you'll be appreciated after you're gone.
Yeah,
that's kind of it.
And in the case of Van Gogh, he got hundreds of paintings, and virtually all of them were done in a 2-year period. So for him, I think he was just in the mode of creation, and not of marketing and not of plugging his art, and maybe at some point, had he lived a little bit longer, it might have paid off. But for him, it was just all about producing art.
Yeah. I got to say, Gene Openshaw, this man we're talking to right now, he spent years writing an opera, and he wasn't in the right spot or the right place to have the right exposure for that opera. It came and it went. And if he had been properly supported and so on, it could have been respected as it should have been. But it was like a meteor that cut through the sky, a little bit of light, and then it was gone. And there's so much of that over the years. We have people who are creative geniuses that do labors of love just because they're pregnant with it and they have to do it. They don't do it because their publisher said it's going to sell. Gene didn't write this book about Michelangelo in midlife because it's going to sell. He wrote it because he's got to do it. It needs to be done. It needs to be said. And Gene's the man to say it. There's well, it's not a dime a dozen, that's for sure, but there are people that are driven by that kind of passion that are really gifted. And the tragedy is probably most of them don't get the appreciation they deserved. How many Van Goghs are there that didn't have a brother who collected the paintings and knew how to sell them, or however that worked, you know? It's just, and how many people sell their soul just to be the Monkees and have a number one hit? Excuse me, I just lost half of our audience there. But, you just got to make those choices. But it's a beautiful thing to embrace art and celebrate it.
Mm-hmm. And kind of building off of Gene being a musician, Rick, you are also a musician. Jane was wondering, you're both art aficionados and musicians. If there could only be one in the world, would you choose art or music?
Whoa. Gene, art or music?
For me, I'm music. But you brought up my opera, which that's the one thing, people go, opera, holy crap, what is opera? That's just weird. But really, opera is music and visual arts and performing arts. That's the word itself. Opera means the plural of opus. You've got many different opuses going on the stage at the same time. You got acting, you got music and singing, you got visual arts and costuming, and you've got directors and the mise en scène. And that's what drew me to writing an opera, is because I loved all of those arts and looking for ways where they can all combine. When it all comes together, it's really very wonderful.
Wow. Now, if I had to answer that question, I appreciate music. To me, music is the horse upon which the poetry rides. And if you can have a beautiful lyric, a beautiful poem, a beautiful story, and put it to music, it has a special access to your heart. I mean, I really, there's something weird about that, but I appreciate that. And when you think about music as art, we have a little bit in the show that Gene and I produced, the Rick Steves' Art of Europe. There's a chance where I'm playing the piano, and we're talking about how music is art for your ears. We all think about art for our eyes, but it's no coincidence that, the music evolves with the art through the ages. And I've always thought that if an artist, like a painter and a composer or a musician could meet, what would be more important for them to be the same medium or from the same age? In other words, who would have more in common? A painter from this period and a painter from that period, or a painter from this period and a musician from this period? And I think a painter and a musician from the same period would speak the same language creatively. And what I like to do is play the piano, and I can go, okay, 1685, Scarlatti, Bach, and Handel were all born. That's when painters and sculptors and architects were doing Baroque, and these guys are Baroque. And when you listen to Bach with all the trills and the interwoven melodies, it's Bernini for your ears. And just to remember that, we can give music an extra boost if you love art, and art a little boost if you love music. And I just love that thought.
Let's see, I got lost in that question there. Oh, I did post a link to Gene's opera, which is called Matter, in the chat. I found it on the CD on Amazon, so you could purchase it there.
Did?
Yes.
Fantastic. I didn't know that was an option.
Yes.
Gene's, okay, good.
And we have time for just one more question tonight. And the question's from Katie. And she asks, there are stories often repeated in art, like you see Mary and Jesus, David and Goliath, etc. Is there a story in art, a common story, that you are most moved by? Gene, you can go first, and then Rick can wrap things up.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, like Rick, I'm thinking of the pre-Raphaelites and how they often took pieces from literature and turned them into art. I'm not sure that it's
you could take a piece of literature and be moderately moved by it. But if you see Ophelia or some pre-Raphaelite masterpiece, I bet the author is really thankful to have that extra visual boost.
Yeah. They often take legend and lore, like from King Arthur or the tale of Ophelia from Shakespeare, and they give it the same kind of romantic brushwork and colors as the emotions that you might feel when you read it. I've often been touched when I look at pre-Raphael works, at the way that they can have almost crystalline clarity. And you can feel the emotions through very simple gestures. That's where I think I'd kind of take the stories or the follow the stories that you might have through the ages, and I think the pre-Raphaelites kind of crystallized those.
And I was so thankful we had 2 hours of total access to the Pre-Raphaelites in the Tate Gallery in London, and we got to grab those paintings and tell the story Jean just did. For me, I think it's David. We've talked about David already, but David can be seen on so many levels. It's this shepherd slaying the giant. It's the faith in God giving you power to overcome the bad guys. It's his hand, which was, bigger than it should have been to slay the giant. It is Florence rising above its city-state neighbors in a sort of civic pride thing. But what I like to think of is when you're looking into the eyes of David, at least the way Michelangelo did it. Remember, anybody who does these things, they've done them throughout the story. Sometimes they just go, okay, you want David? Do you want it 3 feet wide or 5 feet wide? They don't really care. But of course, Michelangelo would give you a philosophical message there. And I think when you're looking into the eyes of David by Michelangelo, the famous one we all know, you're looking into the eyes of Renaissance man as he's sort of sussing up the challenge of slaying the giant of medieval superstition and all that holds us back. His toes are curled and gripping the pedestal, and he's ready to hurl that stone and move forward. And that is the birth of the modern age. That is humanism. That is mankind stepping out of the darkness. And that's why, whether we know it or not, that's why we love David. Man, oh man, what a fun evening, Jean, just to riff on this kind of stuff. Julianne, thank you so much. Thank all of you for joining us today on Monday Night Travel. I want to remind you, we've got lots of travel coming every Monday night, and we're thankful that you are our travel buddies in that weekly way. All right. Happy travels. Good night, Jean.
Good night, Julianne.
Good night, Jean. Good night, Rick. Good night, everyone.